A very good evening to you and welcome to this evening's episode of The Watchdog. Now, among the things last week's mayhem and destruction allowed us to do was getting us to talk a lot about things we previously didn't have as much courage to tackle head on. And we're expecting a lot of such conversations this week as President Cyril Ramaphosa continues to lead crucial conversations within the government, but also between the government and other players such as civil society formations, organized labor, and business. Three former presidents' foundations have between them spent the last couple of decades not only keeping alive the dreams and proud legacies of the men who are their patrons, but what the Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki, and Kgalema Motlanthe foundations have also done has been to bring together South Africans from all walks of life, giving them a safe space to dialogue about the future of our country. Tonight, we thought we would invite them to share their knowledge, wisdom, and experiences in this time of so much uncertainty in our country. The Watchdog starts now. A few hours ago, Acting Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, addressed a daily media briefing to update journalists and the nation about the events or progress that has been made over the past few days on the back of the violence and the looting that we have seen. And today, she had to, among the questions she had to respond to were reports that Defense Minister Mapisa contradicted the President on the issue of an attempt at insurrection in the country. On Friday evening, President Ramaphosa described the unrest that played out in parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng as a, quote, failed insurrection. But on Sunday, Mapisa Nqakula told the Portfolio Committee on Defense that there was not an insurrection in the country. Ntshavheni addressed the media at that briefing a little earlier on, and this is a bit of what came out of that briefing.
Shocking scenes of violence in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, described by President Cyril Ramaphosa while in KwaZulu-Natal as a failed insurrection. But Defense Minister saying there is no such things. Acting Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, says the President's perspective on this is informed by discussions with the National Security Council, which the President chairs.
We want to clarify that the position of government is that, as articulated by the President, of an attempt at insurrection in the country. And that perspective is informed by discussions at the National Security Council, which is chaired by the President, and he receives briefing from the military commanders and also the other law enforcement agencies.
Meanwhile, the number of people who lost their lives as a result of violent protests accompanied by incidents of looting and vandalism in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng has risen to 215.
In KwaZulu-Natal, the situation is now stable and no new incidents of looting were reported. However, 3 additional deaths have been reported. Ministers and provincial leadership led by the Premier, Sihle Zikalala, continued with stakeholder and community engagements to calm the tensions within the communities. Therefore, the total recorded deaths to date as a result of this violence is 215.
Ntshavheni says 6 people have been so far arrested, allegedly for being the instigators of the recent riots. She says 3 people were arrested earlier and have been remanded in police custody while they await for their bail hearing. Abongile Dumako, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And joining me now for a conversation on the issues that go beyond, of course, describing this as an insurrection or not, are members of 3 foundations of former presidents of this country. Let's welcome Professor Panyisa, who is one of the trustees of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Firoz Kachalia, who is the chairperson of the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation, and Mr. Silo Adang, who is the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Good evening to all 3 of you gentlemen, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on this evening.
Good evening, Vuya.
Well, let me start by asking each one of you just your take as a foundation. What is your take on the developments of the past week. Professor Pikiana?
The first thing to say is that this has been a phenomenally crisis moment for South Africa, unmatched in the history of this constitutional democracy. I think we need to recognize that. We can't seek to minimize it. We must recognize it for what it actually was. The second thing is the responsible thing is to avoid finger pointing and charging each other this way or that way. Instead, if we can, it can be a moment of reflection and call for calm and unity in order to enable us to kind of move forward in a way of finding solutions and taking us into the future. The truth of the matter for me, and certainly for our foundation, is that this has been such a phenomenal event that South Africa can never be the same again after this. And we want to make sure that we provide South Africa with the tools, as it were, together to move forward, to create once again the kind of South Africa that our Constitution promises.
Feroz Kachalia?
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Barney and
Feroz.
I haven't. Our board has not met to discuss the situation, so I cannot say that we have a view as a board, nor have I had in-depth discussions in this moment with our patron, Comrade Kgalema Motlanthe. But over a period of time, we've been involved in an effort to promote what we call a dialogue of equals. That is a very broad dialogue encompassing political parties across the political spectrum, but also civil society, the trade unions, the business community, and so forth. Because what informed those initiatives, which are ongoing, is a recognition that over a period of time, we were failing to identify and address some key challenges that the country was facing, and that there was a need for respectful, substantive discussions and dialogue. Now, such a process is very important. I think our intuition that this was required is in some ways been vindicated by current events, because what we're seeing, as Barney has indicated, in this moment is a culmination of a period which has been in our history, which I think has been crisis-ridden, where we've lost our way in some important ways, lost our capacity to solve problems, lost a sense of coherence and vision about where the country is going. And to some extent, we're seeing the very upsetting events over the last few days as a culmination of a period of crisis, underperformance, serious political and ethical decay, deep problems of socioeconomic nature, unsustainable levels of unemployment, deepening poverty and inequality, institutional entropy across the state. So that has been our orientation, our attempt to contribute to an attempt, I suppose, to assist our society to answer the deep challenges that it faces.
Silo Atang, yesterday, of course, being Mandela Day, and another kind of environment, you know, all of us would have wanted, any of us would have wanted to, you know, celebrate his life and legacy. How did it feel for you?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening to my fellow panelists and to you, Ndademvok. I think for us it was a difficult one. It was one of those days that to face the kind of damage head on and to see how lives have been ravaged by what happened, left one with a bit of pain. Seeing the amount of damage, and today we went to an orphanage as part of the Mandela Day or Mandela Month celebrations, where we're helping where we can, and to hear the center manager saying to us that you know, we usually get food from one of the malls, Maponya Mall, in fact, specifically, and she said, since this crisis, we haven't been able to get anything. And now you have children who've been relying on that supply of food just vanished overnight. So for me, it going back to your original question, it reflected two things. The first one is about how, for the longest of time, we've allowed ourselves to always rely on the leader, that there's a greater leader who can take charge and do things on our behalf. Usually it's a politician who we then rely on. And I think if we are to do anything, is to recognize that there has to be a leader from within. Scenes that you've seen in the Northwest, for example, where Ntatemolo Sangwe stopped people from looting. Those are the people we should encourage as leaders in their own right. The second one is we've normalized the abnormal. Going back to Ntate Pityana's point that South Africa will not be the same after what happened last week. And I hope that it means that we will now press the reset button and say, what do we normalize out of our society? What is it that we discard and disavow? And that's what we then need to do. It's a moment of reckoning with how far we've gone in terms of poverty and inequality.
And we're going to get into how we reset that button, as you say, Silo Atang. But I want to go back to both Professor Pityana and Mr. Kachalia just for a second, if you don't mind indulging me on this one. See, for the rest of us, we haven't had the opportunity or privilege of being in the company of a former head of state, you know, who after they will have stopped being, shall we say, the leader, as Silo Atang put it. When they have retired, we rarely get a sense of how they feel like, about what could have been, the things that they could have done, the regrets that they may have, the sort of things that they think they could have done a lot better than they did when they were in charge. Are you able to share with us any insights as to how President Mbeki feels right now, how former President Kgalema Motlanthe feels right now? Professor Pityana?
Thank you very much for your... I have to disappoint you. As it happens, I'm not President Mbeki's spokesperson. And President Mbeki does have a spokesperson and who can probably answer those questions more directly for you. But I think it is fair to say that President Mbeki's views are quite actually open, because he expresses himself at NEC meetings, and he expresses himself in what he writes, expresses himself in the Walter Sisulu lecture that he did recently. President Mbeki's standpoint about what is happening is not very difficult to understand. And certainly we all take the view, which I think Firoz referred to, that actually there have been many steps over time where we have actually allowed the disintegration of the constitutional and democratic system that we have. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that the ANC has systematically allowed itself as an institution that many people in this country have a lot of trust in, to allow itself to actually be used by elements who are counter-revolutionary in nature, inherently counter-revolutionary from all the way from what happened during President Zuma's time, where there was an assault on the state and its institutions. A very deliberate assault on parliament, a deliberate assault on the executive, an assault on SOEs, an assault on security agencies, an assault on the finance institutions of our country. It was very systematic and very deliberate. And in many ways, what we saw last week was a culmination of a very systematic assault on the institutions of state, on our economy, on our capacity to undergo financial modeling for the sake of our people. And the irony of it, which is almost an insult, they even call that radical economic transformation, which actually is neither radical nor transformative. It is actually something that is just designed to capture the state for a purpose other than what the Constitution intends for that. And so President Begi's views are not difficult to find, and I don't claim to speak on his behalf, but I believe that his views are very, very open, and he is mentioned. He's sought to lend a hand to support the ANC very much in renewing itself, because he is just one of those people, and I'm not one of them, who really do believe in the destiny of the ANC in this country. And that this renewal was very, very important. I'm actually personally less convinced about that, although I think that there is, I think Silo has put his finger on it. We need a mindset for South Africans, all South Africans, to really take responsibility for this nation and for this country and where it is going, once and for all, so that we can't just. There's no savior. ANC is not a savior. Mandela was not a savior. We are our own saviors in our country, and so I think that the mindset that needs to change is one whereby South Africans of all walks of life, with all kinds of ideas, democratic in some respects, but black, white, whatever it is, to really take responsibility for this country, so that we can move forward to become what our Constitution intended us to be.
Firoz Katalia, what in your reading or analysis made it difficult for South Africans to coalesce around that common vision that you spoke about? What made it difficult for there to be a coherence, and one assumes that we had a solid foundation if most people or experts are to be believed?
Well, that's a large question. I think I can only offer some thoughts. So in conversation with Comrade Bani and Sello, look, I think that leadership, the quality of leadership, not embodied exclusively in the presidency, but in the political process, the kind of people who are elected, their qualities, their values, their competencies, but most especially also in the highest office of the country, is an important question. speaking for myself, I mean, I think, Madiba had a quality of leadership which we don't have to discuss today. Let's take Mbeki. I think he made many mistakes around the HIV, AIDS, for instance, which had consequences. But I never felt ashamed to be an ANC member when he was the president. I valued his intellect, and most especially I valued my sense that Thabo Mbeki took responsibility on his own shoulders in a very serious way for the future of the country. Nobody could ever doubt that orientation. And I'm not at all surprised that he continues to believe in the renewal project of the ANC and that he's making his effort at his age to contribute to this country's political life. And then, of course, President Motlanthe, I was hoping at Polokwane that he would be elected, because it seemed to me that he embodied the profound revolutionary traditions, the ethical traditions of the African National Congress, the traditions of Madiba, Chris Hani, Ruth First, and so forth. Leadership matters. We chose someone whose elevation to the office of the presidency in this country, in my view, has been an absolute, unmitigated disaster. So leadership matters. But I agree with Sello and Bani that we are at a moment when it's difficult to appreciate that, but I think the crisis potentially is what was needed to help South Africa mobilize its resilience, its capabilities, the people of this country, not just the leaders. And we're seeing that, to reestablish a project South Africa. We need a new dream. We need a new project around which to unite, mobilize the positive energies of this country. And I'm hoping that out of this moment, something positive will emerge. And I think you're beginning to see South Africans in communities across this country take responsibility for the defense of their communities, for the cleaning up of their communities, for the defense of their infrastructure, for the defense of their livelihoods, which has been under attack by a very destructive political phenomenon in this country, which I think we're going to be discussing this evening. Mm-hmm. But I broadly share the initial observations on this matter by Professor Pitiana.
Silo Atang, I just want to quote from the last Mandela lecture delivered by UN Secretary General Guterres. And I am taking this paragraph because it's what a lot of people over the past week, we've been having these conversations on a daily basis. And most people have actually raised these issues as underlying issues, or as the kind of what provided fertile ground for what we saw. And I quote, "Dear friends, even before the COVID-19 pandemic, many people around the globe understood that inequality was undermining their life chances and opportunities. They saw a world out of balance. They were left behind. They saw economic policies channeling resources upwards to the privileged few. Millions of people from all continents took to the street to make their voices heard. High and rising inequalities were a common factor. The anger feeding two recent social movements reflects utter disillusionment with the status quo. Would you say that that's what's been happening in South Africa? And whether it's through manipulation or whether lack of leadership allowed it to flutter, would you say that fundamentally we were reaping the rewards of the situation that Antonio Guterres described when he delivered the last Nelson Mandela lecture?
I think you've nailed it. When he spoke, when the UNSG spoke, we remember thinking to ourselves that it was as if he was reading the script back to South Africans particularly, to say that the very issues that the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, the Kathrada Foundation, our foundation, ISS, and many others have been saying is that it cannot be normal in any society to have the levels of inequality that we have, and you think that you will succeed as a nation. And I think if we are to use Madiba's observations in Long Walk to Freedom, when he was closing off Long Walk, talking about how you climb a great hill, you get to the top, and you can only rest for a little while. Because you look down, you then see many rivers to cross and many valleys and more mountains to climb. We lingered. Madiba says, may we never linger, dare not linger. We lingered. And in lingering, we appointed wrong leadership to try leaders. We also didn't take ownership of the country for the country to progress. But we also forgot young people in that narrative that was being created. If we are to do what Ntate Kachalia says should be done, we must start with believing in young people, in their way of thinking and trying to then elevate young people. In any country, you cannot have inequality that we have where you have over 60% of your young people unemployed. And you think that when there's a spark, they won't then go for it. I think if we are fooling ourselves, if we think that's normal. We cannot have a democracy as violent as ours, violent to its children, violent to its women, violent to how the unemployed who have to always face the indignity of not having food to put on their tables. And we think that that should be a normal society. It can't be. And I think if we are to do the reset, to press the reset button, we must not do what South Africans do best. Forget what just happened last week because it's calm. Calm will then be again before another storm. Who knows how that storm will come this time? It might be that it's another storm that's caused by a similar political incident. But then it then leads to us seeing the real fractures in our society of racism. We must not forget what's happening in Phoenix now as we speak. And we must then try and address those things as we speak about leadership into the future.
If you've just joined us, we are in conversation with three former presidents' foundations who have between them spent the last couple of decades not only keeping alive the dreams and proud legacies of the men who are their patrons, but what the Nelson Mandela, Thabo Mbeki and Kgalema Motlanthe foundations have also done has been to bring together South Africans from all walks of life, giving them a safe space to dialogue about the future of our country. Tonight, we're asking them to share their knowledge, their wisdom, their experiences in this time of uncertainty. Up next, we'll look at how to reset that button, as Silo Hatang calls it. Don't go away. The Watchdog continues right after this. back, and if you've just joined us, we are in conversation with Silo Atang, who is the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, Professor Bani Panyisa, who is a trustee of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, and Feroz Kachalia, who is the chairperson of the Board of Trustees of the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation. Let me come back to you, Professor Panyisa. Let's just say we accept that this was a crisis, unmatched, and we recognize that. Let's accept also that there's no need perhaps for finger pointing right now, but a time to reflect and find a way of moving forward. The president this week is going to continue with conversations that he's been having with social partners, your business, your labor, civil society formations, but also conversations within his own government about what needs to happen next, whether it is to help the poorer people who have been affected by the mayhem we saw last week, how to protect jobs, how to bring into the system some kind of stimulus that will begin to address the wrongs we've known for so long. If you had a chance of being part of those conversations, what would be the 2 or 3 important things that you would put the table, things that would give us, or you think would give us, a good start out of this crisis?
Thank you very much for your thanks to my colleagues. You know, I think that the first thing that we really must do, that government and the social partners must do, is to restore hope in the people of South Africa, hope in our constitutional democratic system. We need to do everything to restore the hope in the functionality of the system for the benefit of the people of our country, which we have lost. So whatever the first thing that must happen is to really do everything to bring the people together in constructing a
Okay, we seem to have a problem with Professor Panyisa's line. I hope we'll be able to re-establish it very, very quickly. If I may move to you, Mr. Kachalia, just from where you sit, where do we begin? I don't know if you, and I'm tempted here to ask you to start perhaps where Professor Panyisa left off, and that is the restoring hope in the functionality of the system. And the reason I'm saying I can't resist taking that point to you is because once upon a time you were an MEC responsible, for policing in the Gauteng province. But I'll leave it up to you.
Yeah. Okay. So in this moment, I think it's very important to stay the course in the fight for a restoration of integrity, the fight against corruption, and to affirm the rule of law. I don't believe we can restore hope and faith in our country unless our people can once again believe that the leaders they elect act only on their behalf and not at the behest of private interests or in their own interests. That is what state capture has destroyed. The idea that a democracy exists, a self-governing democracy exists to govern on behalf of the people. We've got to be able to put the people back at the center by defeating the culture of venality, of corruption, of enrichment, and so forth. Second, I think that we need urgent measures to address the consequences of the lockdown, of the pandemic, and so forth, which has hurt economies across the world. South Africa is not unique. We had a set of measures to support the necessary measures that were put in place to fight the pandemic, but the economic package seems not to have received the kind of attention that is necessary. Perhaps it's being argued that there are financial constraints and so forth, but I think that has to be revisited in the light of the devastation that our people are experiencing. And the third is that I think we need a new policy paradigm, which is what the Kgalema Foundation has been trying to promote through the Dialogue of Equals, to address growing inequality, the challenge of climate change, and the implications of disruptive technological change. Now, I don't want to go into too many details. There are all kinds of ideas out there about a basic income grant, for instance. I think we need to think about new measures to spread asset wealth, like possibly worker ownership schemes, ESOPs, which are well established in many countries across the world. The point I would make is that we need some big, bold thinking. The idea that we can restore hope and restore a vision for the country, a purpose for the country, without asking some basic and fundamental questions will not work. So we can start that conversation about a new policy paradigm, because we've got to start again. Selo said something that's very important. Can you have a democracy with these levels of inequality? I don't think you can have a functioning democracy with these levels of inequality. The two are inconsistent. The two are contradictory. And those contradictions have led us to the point that we are currently facing.
Silo Atang, you mentioned earlier the involvement of young people, without which you reckon, there can be no future for all of us. What exactly are you proposing? What should we do with these young people, or how do you get them involved? What should those who have the wherewithal, or who are elected to do the right things do? What exactly do they do?
I think before I get there, maybe I should continue where Prof. Pityana started around hope. I like quoting Bishop Mpumlwana, who calls Madiba the ancestor of hope. And I think what Prof. Pityana was pointing out at is that this ancestor of hope understood what Mtate Kachalia says, that hope alone is not enough. You have to work hard. Even Madiba understood that he can hope and have faith even that the future will be better, but that he also understood that he had to work for it, for it to get better. And for us to get there, and Tate Kachalia said something about the rule of law. Let's go back there again. And I bringing back the question of young people. So if you were to look at what happened in the Northwest, I gave this example of Ntatemulo Sankwe, who stopped the looting from happening. If you look around the country, most of the people who stopped the looting were young people, telling you that if we are to bestow leadership on young people today, appoint them in important positions of influence, listen to their advice as they are coming through, instead of us always just thinking we are the ones who can lead in these instances, we will go further. And I think if we are to, one of the reasons some of the political parties with young people have some following of young, it's because they tend to then say, we bring you up as young people to lead with us. So if the governing party, for example, starts with appointing young people in strategic positions instead of, and these are not my words, Prof. Pityana and the Kachalia, please, instead of dinosaurs, as they would call it. I repeat, these are not my words. That if we are to do that, that you then appoint young people in these kind of positions of influence, we're likely to then have a situation where the future is then determined by those who will be there to live it. So you don't plant a tree when it's already old. You plant it young so that it gives you shade later. And I think if we are to think like that, that we bestow this kind of leadership, like Madiba kept on saying that even at the point of his appointment at the age of 73, he refused to be appointed as the leader of the ANC. We have him on record as saying it needs to be a young man or a young woman who can do that. And to date, we're still waiting for a young woman to lead in this country.
Professor
political environment.
Mm-hmm. Professor Pityana, do you believe that the leadership we have currently, for them it would be difficult to do the things that Silo Atang is talking about? Are they orientated differently to a point where it would be difficult, if not impossible, for them to change their ways?
Thank you very much. Let me just say that
okay, Prof, we're going to try and get you on a telephone line. Somehow your line keeps dropping. Feroz Kachalia?
Yes, yes.
How do we, I mean, from the lessons you've learned, from the conversations that you've had in the Drakensberg, where you brought these equals who are able to, talk to one another, face one another, and not be shy to, speak the truth, but without, undermining or at each other or swearing at each other. What would you say are the hard lessons that you were able to learn there as a foundation? Lessons that perhaps those in government, those in business, those in organized labor, those who lead civil society can really, take things that would actually build this country from where we are right now.
Let me just say that I think Sela is raising an important question about leadership, which goes back to that conversation. It's not we need a young leadership in this country. People like Ronald Lamola, our Minister of Justice, young people with vision, with drive, with energy, as part of the renewal project in this country. Now, the Drakensberg dialogues. As I was saying, I think we are at an inflection point. We need the courage to abandon old ideas and to be open-minded about new thinking, new paradigms, new ways of addressing the challenges that we face. Recognize what hasn't worked, and introduce new, bold policy initiatives. That can only happen when there's a high level of trust in the conversation, when there are open minds, and when there's when there's a recognition that these are urgent questions. Our patron, former President Motlanthe, always talks about respect, about equality, which is the reason that he's so highly respected. And we were able to bring people from such diverse backgrounds and constituencies into that dialogue, willing, despite their differences, to engage in a discussion. But I have to say that in the end, we can't ignore the political process, our elected leaders, political parties, those who actually exercise power and authority. And so I think that going forward, we're going to need to bring the conversation the kind of conversation that was going on in Drakensberg into a more dynamic relationship with the decision-making process. So we can't ignore the levels of dysfunction in our politics. Now, a lot of the conversation, especially in the media, is focused quite rightly because the ANC exercises power. And a lot of the problems in the country have to do with a process of degeneration in the ANC over the last 10 years. But are solutions coming from other political parties, the kind of bold thinking that is required? I don't think so. And I would say, one second, I would say that I think there's a lot at stake in the outcome of the renewal project in the ANC for the country. I do not agree with the idea that we simply have two equally culpable factions who are fighting with no important issues at stake. There are important issues at stake, and at least from my point of view, if the ANC succeeds in renewing confidence, in renewing itself from within, it could make a contribution to the renewal project in the country.
But do you think, very quickly, do you think they have it, or those who are leading the ANC currently have it within them to look at the rest of society, including the millions of people who are outside of the ANC? Yes, many of them may vote for the ANC, but they are outside of the structures of the ANC. Do you believe that the current crop of ANC leadership has it within them to actually look at the rest of us as equals who have a stake in how the country progresses from now on?
Look, I will have my biases because, I grew up in this movement and I wanted to succeed. And I know, from personal experience, ongoing experience, that there are outstanding people with deep commitment and strong values in the African National Congress. They're being let down by elements of the leadership that are corrupt, that are incompetent, and who have way past their sell-by date, who simply do not have a contribution to make. Now, the renewal project in the ANC must establish a new dynamic, in as much as the country as a whole needs a new dynamic. If the ANC doesn't succeed, it must pass into history, having played a splendid role at one time. South Africa will solve its problems with or without the ANC.
Okay. Sello Atang, how do we awaken, how do each and every one of us awaken the leader in us, the leader in ourselves, without, and I'm not necessarily saying, but I want to say for a second, if we keep the ANC out of this, if we keep the leadership of the ANC out of this, how do South Africans, ordinary South Africans, awaken the leader in us so that we turn the tide?
I think it starts with us recognizing that we don't have some messiah who needs to come in. Prof. Pityana kept on repeating this. We have to, or it was Tate Kachale who said, we are our own savior. And if we are to start like that, that's how you then start changing the mentality. The mindset changes like that. The second thing I think that's important is to also recognize that you kept on asking the question, does the current crop have it in them? I believe that most of them do, as Tate Kachale says. However, we can't forget that not so long ago, we promoted a lot of mediocrity over excellence. And whenever you questioned something, whenever you were saying the unsayable, you were called clever black. So I think until such time that we don't tag each other according to disagreement, but we then have what the Kgalema Motlanthe Foundation has been encouraging us to do, have dialogues of equals. We are likely to then change the way we operate. Just last one on this is on dialogues of equals. For us to create that environment, we must do what Madiba told my predecessor, Ahmad Dango. He said, if you put people in the room who agree with one another, that's not a dialogue, it's a chat. A real dialogue is if you put people in the room who disagree, who don't even want to be there. Let's create those kind of platforms for us to succeed as a nation. Because until such time that those kind of platforms are created for saying the unsayable, we're continuing to poison the future.
Quick last word from you, Professor Pityana.
Professor Kachalia, that a great deal of the problem we have in South Africa is this weakness of valorizing the ANC. I don't think, however, some of us have spent a lifetime with ANC, but the truth of the matter is that the ANC is not capable of undoing what it has done in this country. It is just simply not capable of doing that. So we should stop looking to the ANC as a savior of this country and rather bring the ANC into cooperation and collaboration and participation with all the people of this country who are committed to really transform this country as best as they can. The second thing I want to say to Sello, we must also not valorize youth and young people as such, because at the end of the day, society is driven and brought together by all kinds of people, actually all the people of the country. And in fact, actually, the politics of this country are expressed in all formations of this country, youth included. And therefore, you need to do more than say, we'll look to youth, we'll look to women and all of that. You need to really get to the core of what is it that is about creating a society that is responsible and that takes its constitution seriously.
Okay.
That I don't think the ANC can do. I don't think if you valorize young people, that necessarily does it. But I think we need to think and think deeper. We need dialogue, as we've heard. We need South Africans together again. We need social cohesion where we bring all South Africans together.
Special thanks to Professor Pani Pityana, to Firoz Kachalia, as well as Sello Adang. That's where we're going to leave it this evening. To join us again tomorrow evening, same time. Have a good night.